This episode of the Powell Bros Movie Reviews is brought to you by Fearless Wandering Productions and our supporters at patreon.com. Did you know that patrons of the Powell Bros Movie Reviews get access to a weekly patron-only bonus show called Movie Chronicles with the Powell Bros? They also get early access to our main show. Join today on patreon.com for these benefits and more. And now, on with the show. Another definition of a hero is someone who is concerned about other people's well-being and will go out of his or her way to help them, even if there is no chance of a reward. That person who helps others simply because it should or must be done and because it is the right thing to do is indeed, without a doubt, a real superhero. To my way of thinking, whether it's a superhero movie or romance or comedy or whatever, the most important thing is you've got to care about the characters. You've got to understand the characters and you've got to be interested. If the characters are interesting, you're halfway home. Stan Lee quotes. Alright, so welcome to the Powell Bros Movie Reviews podcast. I am one of your hosts, Tobiah Powell. I'm joined with one of your other hosts, Trenton.
Hello.
Welcome to our podcast.
Welcome. We are back. We are so back. Even though we weren't gone very long, but we're back.
So we're doing another intro episode. This will be the introduction to season 1. We'll just kind of go over everything that we expect to see in season 1 in depth of all the episodes that we'll be doing and covering, all the movies that we'll be covering, and just what you can expect from our reviews and stuff like that.
We're gonna wrap up our entire childhoods and put a nice bow on it.
Yeah,
a lot of movies I'm excited to go back and watch.
Yeah, exactly. So for this season, we'll be going over a lot of the early years of Marvel, both the early years of movies that Marvel made. Also, since it will be chronological, there will be some newer movies, but that take place in the earlier years of the fictional world of Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
So our first episode will be on Captain America, the First Avenger, and that can be expected for next week's episode. We will be doing a kind of like a prequel episode, but we'll be talking about that later. So our first episode will be Captain America, the First Avenger. The next one will be X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past, X-Men Apocalypse, X-Men Dark Phoenix, X-Men Origins, Howard the Duck, Punisher 1989 version, Captain Marvel, Blade, X-Men, Blade 2, Spider-Man, Daredevil, X2, Hulk, The Punisher, and that's I don't know what year that is, but it's not the 89 version.
2002.
Yeah.
It's 2002 or 2004.
Yeah, early 2000s version. Spider-Man 2, Blade Trinity, Elektra, Man-Thing, Fantastic Four, X-Men Last Stand, Ghost Rider, Spider-Man 3, and our last episode of the season will be Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer.
Very much covering all of early 2000s Marvel.
Yes, all the early 2000s
plus
Marvel.
Some others.
Plus the ones that take place in early 2000s or 80s, 90s, 70s, all that stuff.
We'll be experiencing the ups and the very low downs of Marvel.
Yeah. So that'll be season 1. We're going to split all of Marvel into 3 seasons. With each season in between, there'll be a season of non-superhero, non-Marvel. For season 2, our second season of Marvel shows will be everything from Iron Man through Spider-Man Far From Home. And that'll be mostly MCU with a little bit of Sony and a little bit of Fox in there. And that's our plans for Marvel and what we got for that. Oh, I guess for our third season. Our third season will start with, I think it starts with Into the Spider-Verse.
Okay.
Which is an animated one, but that's kind of different, and we'll explain that further.
That's okay.
And that'll go through just whatever comes out. So, I mean, we'll be
probably the Marvels.
6 seasons into the we'll be 6 seasons into our podcast, so whatever's out by that point, we'll be going through all of it. I'm expecting about 30 episodes for that season as well. Season 1 will be 27. Season 2 will be 30, I believe. Exactly. So, expecting about 30 for season 3 as well. Or a third season of Marvel, I should say.
Yep.
But yeah, that's a long rant of our expectations for our actual episodes and what we'll be covering in those.
Yeah, I'm excited. And for anyone who would like to support us, we do have a Patreon. Let's go ahead and go on Patreon and find the Powell Bros movie reviews, and we're gonna have all kinds of great content for you guys, as along the lines of after-hour shows and maybe some special episodes on various topics. We might take breaks from talking about superheroes and throw some episodes on other movies, and maybe just quick reviews of movies even, where there's a whole list of things that we can do and provide for you guys as we build our Patreon support. And so please, the more that you are able to give, the more that we're able to do. And so go ahead and support us on Patreon. And today we have an after hours show, and right after this episode, we will be talking about the multiverse, and Tobiah is going to attempt to explain Marvel's the MCU's version of the multiverse to me, because I'm very confused. Not that I don't get the concept of a multiverse, I just don't get what Marvel is doing, from No Way Home to Loki to Quantumania to what was the other multiverse? Oh, Multiverse of Madness. To me, it seems like they keep setting up threats and then resolving them in their own movies, and not really having a continuous thread throughout the story. So either way, if you want more of that, go ahead and support us on Patreon, and that episode will be dropping along with this one on our Patreon.
Yeah.
And with anything else you would say to that?
No, I mean, it'll be a little more relaxed. We'll just be talking about whatever. I mean, we're going to be talking about Loki, so I'm sure we're going to talk about how we felt about the show and what we liked or disliked. So it'll be also kind of like a little bit of a review of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I don't know about relax, but we'll probably go at it a little bit, which is fine.
Yeah.
Next up, we're going to be for each movie that we review, we're going to provide a ranking. So since we're doing 3 seasons of Marvel, we're going to have a long, 90 film tier list of every single movie ranked. It's going to be our own ranking. We have our personal rankings, and we're going to come to unanimous decision and come up with a full list of our ranking of Marvel movies. And we're going to do it movie by movie. So the first episode is going to be Captain America, the First Avenger. So we're going to obviously have that as number 1. And then the next movie will be X-Men First Class, which I already know now is going to be number 2, and so forth. And we'll move those around. Days of Future Past, that's going to go ahead of First Class for me, at least. But it might change. A lot of these movies I've not seen in a while, so we're going to watch them on our own time and just have our own fresh reaction to these movies and be able to rank them and discern, okay, this is where we think it should fit in our list. And with that, we're gonna have a rating system as well, where we're gonna rate each movie 1 through 10, including decimal points. So we may give one movie a 7.3 and then another movie a 5.1, but we're gonna try to stay consistent so that every single movie in our ranking has a rating system, a rating has a rating to it. So that when we're done, we're able to say, okay, so Infinity War is a 8.9. I don't know if that's what it's going to be. And X-Men Origins Wolverine is a 4.1, whatever. And with that, we're going to have our own system of rating. So we will be looking at story, plot, character development. We're going to look at the villains in the movie, because almost every superhero movie is made the villain will make or break any superhero movie. So we're gonna look at the villains, look at the hero, look at his struggles and challenges. Did he have a struggle? Did he have responsibility that he had to learn to over to take on for himself? And so forth. So we're gonna look at that. We're also gonna look at comic book accuracy. We're not big comic book nerds. We are. Okay, I say we are comic book nerds. But we're not the most nerdy when it comes to comic books. But we know enough. And especially me, I think I would.
We're basically introduced to comics through movies.
Yeah, like we both were. I think I liked. Yeah, well, like Spider-Man has always been my favorite superhero. Still is. Spider-Man, then probably Batman. But Spider-Man's always been my favorite. I was introduced to him in the first Spider-Man movie. I remember watching some of the cartoons after that. I remember, I think, reading some comics, but I was mostly introduced to the villains and the characters in that universe through the Sam Raimi trilogy, and then eventually Mark Webb, is that his name? Whatever his name is, but his last name is Webb. And he made Spider-Man movies. That's all I know. The Amazing Spider-Man movies, and then eventually, I think in high school, I started reading a lot of the Amazing Spider-Man comics. I made my way through the first 30 of them, I think, and I would love to pick those back up because I enjoy those a lot. But either way, and so I know a lot more about Spider-Man comics more than I know about Captain America or Iron Man, but I have gained a little more knowledge over the last handful of years, and just looking at Marvel Comics as a whole, and learning about different characters, and then of course as characters are introduced in the movies, that provides more of an avenue to be like, oh, I want to learn more about this character, and so I'm going to go read this comic and whatnot. But so we want to do the best we can to provide comic book accuracy. Like Wolverine's suit is not very comic book accurate in the Fox universe. Like, we know that. He doesn't wear the yellow and blue, and that's okay. I think within that universe, I don't know if it would have fit with the tone that they set for those movies, but that's something to take into consideration. I think Hugh Jackman's Wolverine is incredible. I don't think any other actor could do better than him, but his suit wasn't super comic book accurate. So it's just little things like that we're going to think through and work through as we build a rating system for these movies.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's I think that's just about it for the rating and ranking. Anything else you want to add?
No. I mean, so I can kind of get into some of what I'll be looking for, and I mean, I think a lot of what we're gonna come down to is what's beautiful in this movie, what's good in this movie, what's bad in this movie, and what's ugly in this movie. I think really come down to those four things, and we can really see
and truth as well.
Where we can just really break a movie down into those four categories, no matter what it is, whether it is the story, the comic accuracy, or the acting, or the cinematography, and just anything. I think it can all be broken down into those four categories, and that's what we're going to be looking at.
One thing that's going to be hard is rating CGI, because it fluctuates throughout the years. However, modern Marvel, we're in the year 2023 right now, and Marvel seems to be lacking in the special effects department. And the computer generation department, because you have things like She-Hulk, and you have what I think was the mess of Quantumania, which I think that, and I've heard some of the issues behind the scenes with those movies and with those projects. It's not necessarily the director and producer's fault. It's literally Marvel Studio just not giving their visual effects department enough time to do the work that they're paid to do. But anyways, so it's hard to judge that, because then you go to the 2003 Hulk movie. It's the CGI is pretty bad in that movie, but it's 2003, and so for 2003 it's not that bad. You even get to Iron Man. I just watched Iron Man the other day, and I can tell some of the CGI is not, it's not great, and it has some problems. But for 2008, it was incredible, and I remember watching it and being like, "This is like the most amazing thing ever." Like I've never seen a suit like Iron Man's in live action, displayed in such a, just a great fashion, and they did a good job doing a full CGI suit. You get to today, and it's like, even then, like, there's more advancement and more ability and more opportunity for these studios to make great CGI, but yet they don't often have enough time to, or they try to do too much, and it just becomes kind of messy. So I don't even know how we're gonna rank CGI. We probably won't even take it into consideration unless it's just like, yeah, this movie just they did not put the effort into making this halfway decent.
Yeah. Well, I think I think we should put a little bit of consideration into it. I mean, we can take into account, like, okay, when was this made? What was the other CGI in other movies like in this movie?
Right, of course.
And if you think of like I was just thinking of, you said Iron Man, and I was thinking Ghost Rider. I mean, the CGI in that was incredible. Like, it really was, and it was just made a year before. It was 2007, so it's just a year before Iron Man.
Yeah. Okay.
So, like, there really was there is no excuse for how the CGI is today, other than they're not giving the time for it. Like, they really just aren't, because we know that the technology exists for them to make great CGI. Right. So I think we'll be a lot harder on CGI as we get down the time, but for these older movies, like, we can be like, wow, for that year, that was groundbreaking CGI.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So you want to talk about why we're doing superheroes?
Yes.
Yep. We clearly are starting with Marvel, and I think it's pretty evident it's something we're pretty passionate about. So, yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of good reasons why we want to do superhero movies. I do not put superhero movies very high on my list of favorite genres when it comes to what makes a good movie, just because I think it's in its own category in itself, meaning that superhero movies require more suspension of disbelief than other movies, which is fine. Like, Star Wars is a it's a space movie about aliens and wizards and laser swords, and it's like, okay, well, there's suspension of disbelief, but it's more driven by story. Superhero movies are more driven by spectacle, and by making sure you're hitting all these different tropes, and you are telling a story, but you're more focused on the spectacle of a superhero, like the amazement of, like, this person is given super abilities, and they're sent to save the world, and like, I think it's more like popcorn movie like, it's something that you pop in and you love doing. You're not always looking at you're watching a superhero movie to kind of unplug, in a sense. Now, I say that I'm not saying that, like, you don't look at plot, you don't consider character development. You do. It is driven by the characters, but it's also, I think, more driven by just the fact that it's a superhero, and we just like watching superheroes. The question is, why is it? Why are we drawn towards that? Why are we drawn towards superhero movies? Why do we like to follow and learn about a person who's given these super abilities to go and save the world? And there's a lot of reasons. For one, I would like to also say one of the reasons why we're doing this is because this was kind of our childhood. We loved superheroes growing up. We just enjoyed watching them, and so as kids, like, that was something we were drawn towards, and it's something we still are for the most part. And I have kids of my own now, and I'm able to show them superhero movies and comics and whatnot, and it's like, it's been fun to be able to bring them alongside, and like, hey, this is like what I got to enjoy as a kid, and now I get to help my boys enjoy it. But I do that and we love superheroes for a reason, and it's because of we are drawn towards these tropes, these themes that we see in superhero movies, where we see a savior, we see one who's willing to give his life for the betterment of others and those around him. He's willing to give his life. He's selfless. He's sacrificial. He takes responsibility. What's Spider-Man's line? Well, or Uncle Ben's line: "With great power comes great responsibility." So with whom is given much, much is expected. If a hero, a person, even if and you have various types of heroes. You have ones who were born with abilities. You have ones that were, which one's common even today that we see in movies and we see in the comics is heroes that become heroes by accident, whether in a scientific accident or you're bitten by a radioactive spider. You're,
what's the quote? You're either born with greatness or greatness is thrust upon you.
It's thrust upon you, bestowed upon you. Yeah, exactly. Not everyone is Superman. Even in these superhero movies, it's like Superman was, I believe, one of the first superheroes ever written. I believe. I think Action Comics #1 is Superman, I believe, and that was like the first comic. And so we kind of get the concept of superhero from Superman, and then all these other heroes come from that. I know Batman shortly came after, and he was completely different because he wasn't born with greatness, but he was born with wealth, but he was also born in tragedy with his parents dying and having to overcome that and eventually learning that he needs to be a hero, but a certain kind of hero in order to save Gotham and save those around him, so forth. Anyway, so you have various types of heroes, but the thing that we see common among them is that they're given an ability that others don't have, and they're given great power, and so therefore what's required of them is great responsibility. So we see those type of themes in superhero movies, and we're drawn to them. One thing we're gonna talk about is just story structure in these movies. So like, one aspect in story plot and stories that we see in movies, I don't know if we call it a trope, but we see what's called the dark night of the soul, which is the moment that, specifically in superhero movies, is when the hero is about to die. We see this often. He's about to die, or sometimes he actually does die, but then he's either saved by another, or he finds the will to press on, or he's given an ability or a power that he maybe didn't know he had, or that he's now been given.
Or there's like a form of resurrection.
Yes, right. And he's resurrected, and then he's able to then defeat the villain. But that happens in almost every superhero movie, where he's at the brink of defeat, and he dies in a sense, and then he's resurrected and defeats. So
every good superhero story has that in it.
Yeah, right.
I think,
and because
I think that's why a lot of the modern Marvel movies don't have that. They don't have them going through a struggle and overcoming that struggle. They have to, in the Dark Night of the Soul, the very important thing is usually for them to overcome it, or for them to get that special power or whatever, they have to repent of something to get that. Like, they have to realize, oh, I've been wrong here. I need to repent of this. And now I have this ability. Now I can overcome this. Was I holding on to my ego, and I need to let go of my ego and repent of that, and now I can save whoever.
Right.
Or get my powers.
Mm-hmm. So like Iron Man 1 is a perfect example of this. Mm-hmm. I love Iron Man 1. It's one of my favorite Marvel. It's top 5. I don't hold me to that, because by the end of this I might change my mind. But anyway, in Iron Man 1, you have Obadiah, who betrays Tony Stark, and Tony's too arrogant to really see what Obadiah is doing. He gets glimpses of it, and he eventually does figure it out. But Obadiah betrays him and removes the arc reactor from Tony, and then leaves him to die. And as he's dying, he goes and finds the arc reactor that Pepper had kept, which he told Pepper to throw away, because he didn't think he needed it. But Pepper's like, no, I want to keep this, mostly for her own sake. It was Tony's first heart, and so she keeps it, and he goes and finds it, and then uses that to resurrect himself and come back. And then he goes on to defeat Obadiah. But one thing, what we see throughout Iron Man, the first one, is that Tony's he's full of himself. He's very self-centered. He doesn't care about those around him. He doesn't work well with those around him. You see his relationship with Rhodey in that, and that Rhodey's just always getting frustrated. He's kind of always having to babysit Tony, because he just wants to, Tony, yeah, he wants to party. He wants to, he doesn't want to take responsibility. He wants to, do his own thing, and he has to overcome that and realize that he can't do it on his own, and that, for one, the only thing that's keeping him alive is this arc reactor, and he was foolish enough to not see that Obadiah was going to betray him, and also to not trust Pepper. And throughout the movie, we see that, but eventually he overcomes that and does learn to trust Pepper and does learn to trust Rhodey, and realizes that he cannot defeat Obadiah. He cannot win without them. And Pepper's actually the one that does, turn on the arc reactor at Stark Industries, and then that's what kills Obadiah. And even in that, Tony sacrifices himself, though he survives. He sacrifices himself in order to kill Obadiah. So, anyways, those are themes the common themes that we see, and I think Iron Man's a perfect example of that. But the reason that we're drawn to that, the reason we want to see our heroes struggle, our heroes come to the point of death, and then be resurrected, and the resurrection is always the moment where we're cheering and getting excited and rooting for our hero, and we see his character arc come to its conclusion, and so forth. We love that. We want that because that's how God writes stories. Death and resurrection is the most common theme in all of history, and specifically in all of Scripture, starting all the way back at Genesis 3:15, when God promised that, he says that one would come to crush the head of the serpent of Satan, the one who deceived man into sin. But he says that won't happen until that person, that promised one, would first be crushed, would first be bruised, as the Hebrew word says. He's going to die, but in his death, he's going to defeat the serpent, the villain. So he's promising that the Messiah will come, but that he will die first. But through death, he will defeat the serpent. And so the modern superhero, he's always a Messiah, one with superhuman abilities, one from another world, one who comes and saves people from the villain, from the serpent, to go and kill the dragon. But the hero often dies. He is bruised. He is crushed before he is victorious. So that's a common theme that we see in any story. Like we love
even
if
you think of success stories, like you always want to hear the success stories where the person was. I mean, you hear Dwayne Johnson's all the time. I had $7 in my pocket, and it's like that's all he had. So then that was enough to like he was at his lowest and worst, and that's what gave him the strength to push forward and to get into wrestling and get into acting, and now become the world's most successful actor. So you hear that all the time with any kind of success story. It's like you love those ones that like, oh, they had nothing and they made something of themselves.
Adversity breeds character and breeds success in various capacities. Like we will not grow as people without adversity, without trials, without hardships. And we look to heroes, and we see we can identify with them in a certain way, and that like, wow, like we went through that struggle, we went through that hardship, and then we see the hero overcome it. And then I think as Christians, we look at superheroes and we see, right, we need a hero, we need a Messiah, we need a savior who would come and defeat the villain, defeat the enemy, defeat the bad guy, and rise victorious. And so we desire that because that's the way that God tells stories. That's why we love stories. Like there's a certain formula that's ingrained in every story, because every story is written by the great storyteller, and we see that in superheroes, and we long for that as we watch superhero movies and read superhero comics. And so as we said in the intro episode, like stories change us, stories inspire us, stories spur us on. They teach us about difficulty and hardships and trials, but also what responsibility looks like, and what it looks like to be a character in your story. Because we are all characters in this story, and so the question always is, what kind of character am I going to be? Am I being the villain in this scenario, or am I being the good guy? Am I being the superhero? Maybe I'm a supporting character in someone else's story, and what does that look like for me to support that person as they work towards their goals and are driven towards what they're driven towards, and how can I support them? So I'm a support character in my son's lives, in a sense, and so how am I supporting them? How am I coming alongside them as they grow, and as they learn, as they read stories and learn and learn from stories and so forth? So which is going back to, we're going back to the theme of this podcast. Like we want to talk about stories and why stories are important, and superhero movies are a pretty big they have a big influence in our culture. Just look at the box office. Marvel has been one of the most successful studios of all time. Like they have some of the highest grossing movies of all time, and there's a reason for that. And I think it's because our culture is longing for heroes. And of course, I would say they're longing for a Messiah, and they're finding it in the wrong place by looking at movies and looking to these superheroes. But it shows that there is an innate desire and an innate drive for something beyond them, something that they can't obtain in and of themselves. And so that's another reason. Like superhero movies have had a huge impact on our culture, among the youth of our age, among our generation, and the generation that's coming up right now, and throughout, the generation that's coming up right now. It's like superhero movies have an impact, and what we see with Marvel now is that I would say they're not telling very good stories, or we see that that they're not telling good stories now, and then we're seeing the impact that I think it does have upon others. Not saying that's the only thing. That's like movies and stories aren't the only factor in all this, but it is one that we're focusing on and talking about and saying, hey, this is what we see. These are themes that we see and how they impact us in different ways and so forth. Because I was saying everyone watches movies, but we want people to discern how to watch movies and how to watch superhero movies. Especially that's why we're going over like every single Marvel movie, because we want people to be able to learn. Okay, even like when you watch a movie like X-Men Origins or Howard the Duck, people say those are just awful movies, and so then you can go into it with the expectation being like, oh, this is going to be a terrible movie, without maybe even knowing why it is terrible. So it's like we want people to know, like, okay, this is what's wrong with this movie, this is why it fails, this is what's good in this movie, but so we want to look at the good, we want to point that out, but also say like, this is where they went off track. Character was not well written, and his arc is non-existent in this, and so forth, and he doesn't have that struggle, he doesn't face that adversity, and we just want to point those kind of things out for everyone, and so that they can go into the movie and think about it from a more objective standpoint.
Yeah, and we could also, we will, as soon as we get to, I think our first one is, I guess technically Dark Phoenix, but that one and Captain Marvel, these female-led superhero movies, we can get into. I mean, this is just a fact. They don't do as well as male-led superhero movies, and we will get into why that is, why people just aren't as drawn to those ones as they are with
and like
male-led.
I don't want to get into it right now, but I would say that I think there's a way to do a good female superhero movie. I don't think people get it, because what these female superhero movies are trying to do is they're trying to say these women can act like men. They can square up with the men. They can be men in a sense, and that's not what makes a good female hero, I guess. And there's a lot more to that. But instead of being a good female hero, they're trying to say this female is a good male hero, because they act like a man. But even in that, they usually don't give these females any struggle, anything to overcome. Captain Marvel is a great example of that. She doesn't really have much to overcome in her story, and that's a problem, because it's hard to identify with a character that doesn't struggle, that doesn't have some adversity that they need to work through, and they don't have character development. Like, I would say Captain Marvel has not had character development throughout her first movie, and what I've heard from the Marvels, I've not seen the Marvels, from what I've heard, or even what we see in Infinity War, Endgame, and wherever else she showed up.
She's just a beacon of feminism that flies through the air.
Yep, pretty much. And it's not just us saying that. Like, anyone, like, looking at these movies, objectively, can say, like, yeah, they're not giving her anything to overcome. She's a very flat character, who's happens to get receive these great powers from the Tesseract, and then is able to go and save the world by not having to deal with her own internal struggles and overcome what she's
I think you hit it on the head. Like, they just don't. It is very possible to make a good female-led film, just in general, like any kind of film, and also superhero. And you're right. They treat these women as they're just as good as men in a male role, and there are differences between men and women. There are different roles that men and women have
that are both glorious
in life that they are given. They have a purpose, and they are glorious in their purpose, not in the man's purpose.
Yep.
And they need to stop making movies where these women are they're trying to be represented as glorious in these male roles.
Yep.
And that's where they fall short.
Right.
But yeah, we will get into it a lot more when we get to Dark Phoenix and Captain Marvel.
Yep. Yeah, anything else you'd like to add to that as far as why we're doing superheroes? And I don't think I have.
No, I think we're good. I mean, I think you hit it on the head, and that we just are really drawn to these stories because of the savior aspect of them, and what the superheroes represent.
And then, of course, they're just fun to watch. They're fun to there's something that you can enjoy. And I also, there is a line there, of course, where you can enjoy too much. But I hope that we can be helpful to people as we evaluate and talk through these movies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because then you're going to get to like the X-Men, and where you have multiple heroes all working together, and dealing with their own struggles and their own things that they need to overcome, and just it'll be interesting to talk about like team up movies, I guess, and just how does this work, and how do we understand those dynamics.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some movies where we will see when it works well and when it does not work, and we'll definitely be able to talk in depth about that.
Yep. All right. Well, next up, do we want to talk about the history of Marvel and what's led up to what it's called the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and especially this is kind of what we're talking about as we go through these movies.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's get into the history of it.
Yeah, so we really want to provide a history of Marvel, just for us to have a good context going into next week's episode, and just good context for all of our shows going forward. So Marvel itself was actually founded all the way back in 1938 by Martin Goodman. It was at that time called Timely Comics, and by 1951 it had generally become known as Atlas Comics. So it'd gone through a lot of different names, and I would say Timely and Atlas are definitely not as cool as Marvel, but that's what they went with. The Marvel era, the name Marvel, actually began in June 1961 with the launch of the Fantastic Four. The Fantastic Four being the first actually like really superhero comic. Well, I'll talk about this more in a second. But the first like one that we would recognize, first like team up comic and whatnot, like, and first one under the Marvel era. It was Fantastic Four. And then there was other, of course, superhero titles after that were created by Stan Lee. We, of course, know him. And other men that maybe aren't as popular, but his name, one was Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and then there's many others. So, Tobiah, do you know who the first Marvel superhero was? The first one under, I believe it was under Timely Comics, but the first Marvel superhero. Can you guess? I guess.
I don't think I do.
Cool. So the very first one was the Human Torch. Yeah, the Human Torch was the first created hero. Alongside, I think it was Hydro Man was the other one. But of course, the Human Torch being the more well-known one. That was Marvel Comics #1. So sorry, this was under Marvel after 1961. Before the Fantastic Four, they released Marvel Comics #1, and it featured the Human Torch. Now, do you know what Stan Lee's first comic that he wrote was? Because Stan Lee didn't do the Human Torch one. But do you know what his first comic was?
Like what? Superhero?
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess maybe the Fantastic Four.
Yeah. There you go.
Was
Fantastic Four.
it the one with? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Now, Fantastic Four was his first. You get eventually when he wrote Spider-Man, Fantastic Four featured in that. I believe they're featured in the first Spider-Man comic.
Yeah, it was Spider-Man featured in a Fantastic Four comic. Yeah,
basically, yeah. Because that was I can't remember the title of the comic now. Amazing Fantasy.
Yeah.
That's gonna bug me.
It's Amazing Fantasy #1 or something.
Yeah, Amazing Fantasy #1. Okay. And I think I've told you this, but I have seen a copy with my own eyes of that first comic of a Spider-Man and Amazing Fantasy. It was in pretty bad shape. I think it had like a 3.2 grade, which is very low. It's 3.2 out of 10 as far as quality. And I think it was still going for like $7,000 or something. It was something ridiculous. Because I don't know how many there are like left in the world, but there's not much. Which just imagine that, like being able to buy a comic for like 5 cents, and then later years later find out that it's worth thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah. Wow.
But what's interesting is Marvel Comics, as they grew as a company, as a comic book company, they went through a lot of ups and downs, which they, of course, went through lots of ups and downs as a movie studio as well, which we'll get to. But as a comic book company, they went through a lot of ups and downs. And I think a lot of comic companies struggle with this, but because people wanted to collect comics and collect them thinking that they were going to be worth money, people would go and buy, like, I'm going to buy 5 of this comic that they released. They say it's Captain America comic. I'm going to buy 5 of them because I think that in 20 years it's going to be worth a lot of money. The problem is that everyone would do that. Everyone would buy like 5 of them, and then it wouldn't be worth that much money because everyone has it. And so then people would be like, oh, this isn't really worth it. Then I'm not going to buy comics anymore. And then it would go up and down as far as profit. So they would never know like how much they were actually going to make on any comic that they released, because eventually people would stop buying them because they're like, oh, they're not going to be valuable. little did they know that there were a handful of them that are valuable, but really it's not that many. Like there's not really that many comics out there that are worth thousands, dare I say millions of dollars, like some of the Amazing Spider-Man comics. I don't even know how much the first Superman comic is worth it, or like even I'm sure you can find them, but I'm sure that's almost millions of dollars. But either way, so they would go through that, and so Marvel as a company, and like under Timely Comics, but specifically in the Marvel era, they would just, as a company, they would really struggle. But I think a lot of comic book companies were struggling at the time. So Stan Lee would go on to write a lot of the heroes that we love and appreciate, like Spider-Man, like the Hulk, Fantastic Four, Iron Man. He created Iron Man, and Marvel would have a lot of success during that time. If you go back to when they were, I believe, Timely Comics, one of the first superheroes that they released to the public was Captain America, and it was during World War II. And, so the cover where Captain America is punching Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Which they do in Captain America, like when Steve Rogers is going around doing the propaganda tour, they have him punch Hitler. It's like, well, that's directly from the very first Captain America comic, who was one of the first superheroes created by Marvel, Timely, Atlas, whatever name you want to give to him back then. But that was eventually at one point they actually turned away from comics because it wasn't becoming profitable. So they turned away from superheroes. They would still release comics, but it would be like romance comics and dramas and adventure stories. But it didn't really catch on, and no one really wanted that. And so they just, for a lot of time, a lot of that period, they were just kind of scrambling to find something that would click with people and stick with people. And this would go on for years. Eventually, Marvel realized and recognized that adapting their characters to movies was going to be a more profitable endeavor than doing comics. And so you would get various movies and TV shows that we are familiar with. But really, what it really come down to is they just made a lot of really poor decisions, and they didn't really know how to market these superhero movies and superhero TV shows. So in the 60s and 70s, they tried their hand at live action TV shows, and we can think of Lou Ferrigno's The Incredible Hulk, which is well known, and it was actually well received, and it was successful, but it wasn't long lived. We also have an animated Spider-Man show, which is not the 1990, I think 1992 one that is one of my favorite TV shows. That I've actually been watching through with my boys, but it's not that one. It was way before that. In like I think it was in the I think it was like 67. It was a Spider-Man TV show. I don't even know if you can find it anywhere, but they tried their hand at that. Didn't last very long, and so in order to make money, actually backing up, having little success with their pursuit of movies, doing the Incredible Hulk. They had a Captain America live action movie as well in the 70s that it didn't do very great. And I know they had a handful of others during that period. But after very little success in their attempt at making movies and TV shows, in 1996, Marvel Studios was forced to declare bankruptcy after facing just a mountain of debt because they kept pouring money into these projects, and there was no return. And so in order to make money, they started selling off a lot of the rights to their characters to other studios. So we have the X-Men and Fantastic Four going to Fox. We have Spider-Man that went to Sony. We have Hulk that went to Universal. We'll kind of get a little more into that later, mostly when we talk about the Incredible Hulk. But because Marvel did have rights, still had distribution rights. Universal had distribution rights to the Incredible Hulk, meaning that they can decide when and where the character of Hulk is used, and so they chose to partner with Marvel in order to make the Incredible Hulk, Edward Norton's Incredible Hulk, which was the second movie in the MCU, and which set up eventually the Avengers. But that was still under Universal mostly, and same as with Spider-Man right now, because Spider-Man is owned by Sony still, but Marvel has bought some of the rights to Spider-Man, but Sony still has the say, can say whether or not they can use Spider-Man in whatever project.
So I do want to point out, because I was just thinking about the 70s stuff and talking about this season. We won't be going over any of the 70s stuff.
Right.
That's the only thing. We're not going over any of the 70s TV shows or 70s
a good Patreon
movies.
episode would be us watching the Captain America movie or the Incredible Hulk TV show, which I would love to do. But
yeah,
I think about it.
For sure. Yeah, so we're not going to be going over those. That's the only thing we're not going over, mostly because they're just irrelevant.
Yeah, safe to say.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna get more into why, actually, because the movies and TV shows in the 70s were under the title company Marvel Productions. It wasn't what we know of as Marvel Studios. So after selling off their character rights to these various studios, in order to stay afloat, because they're selling these characters to Fox and say, hey, give us this much amount of money so that we can be profitable. You can make a movie. You can make the movies. You can do what you want with the characters, but we would like a paycheck for giving you those characters in those movies. For those.
Do you know if? Because I know Ghost Rider was made by Sony. Did they sell Ghost Rider?
Is Columbia a Sony company?
Yeah, Columbia is Sony. Yeah.
So it was Sony. Yeah, so Ghost Rider.
Sell.
Sony had. I'm assuming they still do. I mean, I know that Ghost Rider was in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show. So I'm guessing Marvel now has the rights to Ghost Rider. There was rumors that he was going to be in Multiverse of Madness, and he's most definitely going to be in Secret Wars. Hopefully Nick Cage. But anyways.
Yeah.
So yeah, going back to Marvel in the late 90s, after they sold off their character rights, they did so in order to stay afloat, and eventually they partnered with a toy company of all things called Toy Biz. This was in 1998. And they did so under the direction of Toy Biz's CEO. His name is Avi Arad. And Marvel at this point, Marvel as a company was completely restructured from the ground up, which led to the formation of Marvel Studios. But at first, they didn't actually focus on movies. They instead operated as a packaging company, so kind of continuing the same thing where they're selling their characters off. They would be a packaging company that provided screenplays, directors, and actors for lead superhero roles, with the intention of selling those packages off to other studios. The first package being Wesley Snipes' Blade. They got Wesley Snipes, they got director, they got the screenplay and everything. They're like, okay, New Line Cinema, here you guys go, give us money and go ahead and make your movie. And of course, Blade was very successful at that time for a superhero movie. I don't know exactly how much it made. I forgot to look, but it made a very good profit, especially for a superhero movie, and one that was rated R, that was very dark and gritty, and was unlike really anything else that we'd seen at that time. But it did really well, and so a lot of other studios wanted to profit off of that and jump on that bandwagon, and so that's also where Fox came in. And said, what year did Blade come? Blade came out in 1998, so it was around the time when they went bankrupt. Then they became a new company. They kind of became a new company, and then sold off their rights, or sold the rights of these various characters to these companies. Up to this point, when we get to Blade, what we can also look at what came before that. The very first Marvel produced movie was, do you know?
Howard the Duck.
Yep, Howard the Duck, which had and do you know who the executive producer on Howard the Duck was?
George Lucas.
Oh yeah, the one and only. Except for he very much regrets ever having any attachment to this movie. And so does Marvel. Marvel doesn't want you to know it exists. That's why, if I'm not mistaken, it's definitely not on Disney Plus, nor will it ever be on Disney Plus.
No.
But Howard the Duck happened. They wanted to. Howard the Duck was actually the only film that Marvel really attempted. From what I can find, Howard the Duck was the only movie that Marvel attempted as a studio to make before they went bankrupt. And this was originally supposed to be an animated film, and they later chose the live action route, and that was probably a terrible decision, especially with the CGI that they had. And I mean, I know they used a lot of practical effects and whatnot, but it was
although
go ahead.
Although they're trying to hide this movie, this is one. Howard the Duck is one of the ones we will be watching and reviewing.
Correct.
Since it was under Marvel Studios,
right?
And everything after that, we will be every other Marvel movie after that we will be going over.
Actually, Howard the Duck was not under Marvel Studios. It was under Marvel. I think it was it wasn't production. So it's whatever it was, but it was a Marvel movie. So
it was 100%.
But it was before they partnered with Toy Biz, before they restructured as a company and became officially Marvel Studios. So I'm assuming if you watch Howard the Duck, it says it was produced by Marvel Productions, not Studios. But that's just getting into the weeds.
I think there's a lot that do.
Yeah. So there's another movie we see before Blade is the 1989 Punisher movie, which was under a New World Pictures studio. That it was under the studio New World Pictures, and Marvel had also, from what I could tell, sold the rights to Punisher to them so that they could make the 1989 Punisher movie. Which I think Marvel still had some involvement in that, but I don't know how much.
Yeah.
We were talking about this earlier.
We were talking about it before we were recording.
We talked about this before we started recording, but in 1994, they were going to release a Fantastic Four movie, but that was never actually saw the light of day. You can find a bootlegged version of it somewhere online. In the dark.
Yeah, so the completed movie does exist.
Yeah.
But it is not officially released by Marvel. Mm-hmm. It was just leaked.
Right. Which is definitely interesting. That was in 1994. And then you get to 1998, so 4 years later, which is funny. If you look at the production quality of what you can see of Fantastic Four, and then you look at Blade, it's like night and day. Even in 4 years, they made a lot of improvement. Of course, Blade having been produced before 1998 but released in 1998. So yeah, that's where you get that's where we're at with Blade. After Blade, like I said, Fox saw the success that New Line Cinema had with Blade, and so they sought to capitalize on it by releasing the X-Men in the year 2000. So there's Fox. So Marvel sends package deal, says, okay, you guys have these actors, you have this director, you have this screenplay. Go ahead, make your X-Men movie, but pay us for the characters. Sony, same thing with Spider-Man. Sony's like, oh, okay, so New Line Cinema, they're successful. You have Fox, they have the X-Men, which did really well as also, and so Sony's like, okay, we want Spider-Man, so they get the rights to Spider-Man. They make one of the best superhero movies of all time, Spider-Man 1, and then even better in Spider-Man 2. So capitalizing off that. But what's significant about all of this is that Marvel made nothing off of all these movies. They don't get a dime because they only get what they sold the character for. So they sold the package deal and they get the profit from that, but they don't get whatever money's made off of the movies. That's where they were at. But they were at the point of bankruptcy. Like they did declare bankruptcy. They had to take out a massive loan. They needed to pay off their debts, and so they're like, okay, we'll just sell these characters. So So Marvel Studios now, after seeing the success of Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man, they started planning and looking towards what it would look like for them to start making movies again. It's like, okay, they've been selling off these characters, but if they just keep doing this, then they're not gonna have any characters left. Then they're gonna be Marvel Studios without any superheroes. And so they're like, okay, how can we capitalize? What would it look like for us to start making movies? And so after being 10 years, from being in bankruptcy up to 2008, they eventually had taken out a $525 million loan, and they were coming up to having to pay it back. And so during this, they were forced to sell off another like 10. I think overall they were forced. If they could not pay off the debt, they were going to have to sell off 10 more of their properties. One being Captain America, another one the Avengers. Like, they could not use the Avengers had they had to sell these characters. Nick Fury was another one. Black Panther, Shang-Chi. There's a handful of others as well. But I think it was up to like 10 that they were thinking, okay, we're gonna have to sell these off to these studios in order to pay off these debts if we don't fix this, if we don't figure out a way to profit off of these characters that we do have. And so they were kind of left in a state of panic, and they need to find something that worked. They need a franchise of movies in order to pay off their debt. And then along came Kevin Feige. Kevin Feige started off as the head of creative input in Marvel. He even worked through Marvel with Fox. He was a producer on X-Men and had involvement there. But within Marvel Studios, he gave creative input and saying, okay, this is, if you guys want to be successful, like, this is how you need to work, how you need to write your characters and present your characters, and these are the type of movies that I think you should make, and so forth. All different creative ideas that he had that he was able to give to them as, a comic book nerd, and that he loved comics and loved movies, and so anyways, that was his role for a while, and then eventually he made his way up the ranks in Marvel to eventually becoming the president of Marvel. And as president, he I don't know how much involvement he had with Iron Man, but he played a pretty significant role in getting Iron Man into production. I know Jon Favreau as well. He was a big part of that, obviously, as the director. But he came with the idea of Iron Man, if I'm not mistaken. What we're going to talk more about it. There's a whole story behind how Iron Man came to be that is actually quite fascinating. Like, everything was against them. The fact that they chose Iron Man as the first hero in the MCU is actually people don't think about this now because we've seen Iron Man for so many years and we've grown to love the character. But if you go back to 2008 and you watch a trailer, which I remember watching the trailer, it was actually very cool. But I guarantee you, Tobiah, and myself, I know we had no idea who Iron Man was. Like, I might have heard of him coming by reading some other comics, but for the most part, he was a very low tier superhero, and that's what people don't realize. Like, he wasn't top tier. He wasn't Spider-Man. He wasn't Captain America. He just wasn't known as a great superhero, or like, as he wasn't very well known among the people. But they're like, we're gonna go with Iron Man, and not only that, but we're gonna go with this guy that just got out of rehab, named Robert Downey Jr. So Jon Favreau took a huge gamble on Robert Downey Jr., knowing that it could all fall apart. RDJ could ruin the whole production. But he's like, I want this guy to be my Tony Stark. And there was a lot of other iterations of Iron Man, a lot of other concept ideas. Tom Cruise for a long time was considered. He was, from what I know, he was never considered by Jon Favreau. But before Marvel, because Marvel had thought about doing Iron Man before, because not only was Iron Man a very low tier character, but they didn't have very many options, as we talked about. Like, they got rid of the X-Men, they got rid of the Fantastic Four, they didn't have Spider-Man, they didn't have all these great heroes that people knew about, and so they had to, like, kind of scrape from the bottom of the bowl, and one of those being Iron Man. And so so he's very low tier, but so they took a huge gamble with him, and obviously it paid off. Because we saw the success of Marvel over the following 10 years from 2008, and we've seen its ups and downs. We see its ups and downs as a comic book company. Saw its ups and downs as a studio. They made a lot of poor decisions in both scenarios, as a comic book company, as a film studio, and now I think we still see them making pretty poor decisions, and to the point where they're probably going to reboot everything with Secret Wars, which we'll definitely talk about more in the future. But yeah, it's fascinating to follow them throughout the years and see how they grew as a company, and what led us to get all the movies that we have now, and all the movies that we're going to be talking about and covering. There's a lot more to talk about with Iron Man. There's a lot we could say about Captain America and Thor as well, and like how all these movies came to be, and what laid the foundation for the Avengers and so forth. But we'll definitely dive into that as we go further. So, Tobiah, do you have any other thoughts or any questions about what we just covered?
No, I think that covers everything. I mean, I think that really will set a foundation for what people can expect from season 1,
Mm-hmm.
and what we'll be talking about in our episodes about these different superheroes and just the craziness that was Marvel in the early 2000s, and we'll be going over all of it. And now that we kind of see that today, all these old movies that Marvel had, all these old characters that Marvel sold to these different production companies like Sony and Fox, how they are now coming into the Marvel universe with the multiverse and all that.
Yeah.
We can really see that they are becoming canon, and that kind of brings a new excitement for all these old movies too. So that'd be cool to kind of go back to see them and watch these movies and know that, oh, these are a multiverse soul kind of thing going on. And we'll be talking about that in our After Hours episode. We're going to talk about explaining how these are all connected and how the multiverse works in the Marvel universe. And I'll be explaining my perspective on it and how I think it kind of actually makes sense, especially with the recent Loki series and what's coming up with these multiverse movies. But yeah, I think that kind of wraps up our episode here today. And our next episode will be coming out a week from today. For the listeners, you can expect to hear our reviews for Captain America: The First Avenger.
Yes, I'm excited.
Yeah.
Look forward to it.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
This is the Powell Bros Movie Reviews.
See ya.